Hello, everybody, and welcome to Macro Pro and Friends, our sixth day of 12 CEUs of Christmas. That is a mouthful. I am joined today by Mandy Farquhar, my colleague. Mandy, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Diane. Kind of busy during the Christmas season.
Yes, are you and your family doing things special?
Yes, we usually have all our family over and friends for Christmas, so I'm looking forward to that. And also
Well, I have to go ahead.
Visit our families that can't make it.
Yes, I have to say, for those of you who've never been to Mandy's house, she really has a beautiful table every year. Well, thank you, Mandy, for getting our guest speakers for this particular topic. We have a really nice large crowd, and I know that everybody's looking forward to this CEU credit. I just want to remind everybody that we have more CEUs coming up, so you can sign up for those at macropro.com. And just a little bit of housekeeping. Today's CEU program is for 1 hour in California. In addition to that, you must be logged on to the GoToWebinar platform in order to receive your hours, and you do need to be on it for as close to an hour as possible in order to receive that CEU. GoToWebinar will not send it to you if you are on for a reduced amount of time, shall we say. In addition to that, we do have questions that are going to be available. You can ask those in the control console. And then lastly, just as a reminder that at MacroPro, we can get you any and all records that you would like. So when you need Medi-Cal set-asides, you are always getting documents. So we will be happy to get those for you. All right, Mandy, I understand that you actually work for this company. Can you tell everybody a little bit about what you did and introduce our guest speakers?
Yes, I was the director of the West Coast for sales. I worked closely with Mark and Shawn and Tsitsi, and I would be happy to introduce them as our featured speakers today. We have with us Mark Pololizio, Shawn Johnson, and we also have Tsitsi Marzuika, the director of sales of the West Coast. Mark is the vice president of the Medicare secondary payer compliance for Verisk Analytics. He's a nationally recognized expert in the MSP compliance world. Mark practiced insurance defense litigation for 10 years, concentrating in the areas of workers' comp and general liability before he came to Verisk. His colleague, Shawn Johnson, who is the legal director at Verisk, he is highly knowledgeable and experienced in his role assisting claims organizations to navigate all the complexibilities of Medicare secondary compliance, specifically as it relates to the Medicare conditional payment resolutions. And I watched Shawn in action. So thank you for being with us, and I'll let you start your program.
Thank you very much, Mandy and Pro for allowing us to come back and do a session here as part of your webinar series. Real excited to be here. We did a bunch last year. And, Shawn, let's back it up to the title page. I want to just study that for a while. And thank you, everybody, for attending today's session. This may be a little bit different than you're used to. Maybe it'll be more fun, right? Okay, where in most presentations you have, standard slides with information, et cetera. And we've done tons of those, right? That's probably the majority way we do presentations. But lately, some clients have asked us to do some real granular trench level type training, away from standard type slides, more with fact patterns, multiple choice questions, true, false, et cetera. And remarkably, the response has been really good. And we're finding that some people are grasping the material better with these type of real practical type applications. So this may be one of those presentations where you may find yourself old school taking notes, okay? And you'll hear a lot of dialogue between Shawn and I today. He's really the expert. He has the pleasure of working with CMS every single day on a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. He's seen it all, right? He's amazing when he's on the phone and addressing the questions. He's going to bring that experience to the table today. He's going to be the primary presenter. I'm going to open it up a little bit. I'll act more or less as the moderator. And from time to time, I may ask Shawn different questions from the fact pattern. So I want you to just throw away your mindset of the typical type presentation where it's typical slides and stuff. I got one standard type slide in this deck. The rest are multiple choice, fact patterns, and true, false. Okay, with that said, let us move to the next slide, right? And that's who we are. Okay, doesn't get better the second time, all right? The next slide, Medicare basics and refresher. Let's start there, okay? Let's look at the next slide. Now, folks, as we go along today, I want you to study the titles of this slide. And the reason why is because I want you to get your mind ready to what lane the information goes into, okay? So there's a method to it. The fact patterns are going to be numbered numerically all the way throughout, 1 through, I forgot how many we have, okay? Right, but this question or this fact pattern, I'll do the first 2, and then I'll bring Shawn in for the rest, okay? Deals with the idea of determining Medicare status. And when we talk about Medicare recovery claims, I forgot to mention it, that's our focus today, right? You and I call them lien claims. It's not really a lien, but who cares? We all know what we're talking about here today. We're talking about reimbursement action, right? We first have to figure out whether the claimant is on Medicare, right? And this is true whether some examples, we have comp today, we got no fault, we got med pay, we have a liability, okay, third-party liability. But no matter what, we have to first figure out whether this injured party, this claimant, is a Medicare beneficiary. This is where I'm going with the first one. So let me tell the story. Okay. The adjuster and defense counsel, all excited. They just finished a big case out of mediation. They settled it. They're all excited. The adjuster's driving home, and all of a sudden she remembers, oh my God, I think we forgot to check Medicare status. Calls counsel, Bob, we forgot to check whether the claimant's a Medicare beneficiary. What do you think the best way for us to do this is? We didn't do this as part of the mediation. Counsel assures the adjuster, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. I asked the claimant lawyer in the elevator after the mediation whether her guy was on Medicare or not, and she told me no. Okay, so now the big question that arises here is what's the best way? There's 2. What's the best way to determine Medicare status, right? Probably not the elevator method. Okay. Oh, by the way, is your guy Medicare? No, great. That's probably not the best way. Okay. The better way for the insurers who are on the phone, it doesn't matter which forms of insurance, it's the Section 111 query process, right? The query process is part of the 111 reporting. You may not even do the reporting, right? But on the carrier side of the house, somebody does in your organization, right? Okay. And the query tells us, number one, whether the plaintiff is a Medicare beneficiary. Not only that, and this will become important in a little bit, it now also tells us the type of Medicare the person has. And that will become clearer in a minute, right? So the elevator is probably not the best way to do it. And in the old days, we did interrogatories and production requests and claim questionnaires and stuff like that. I mean, there's probably a place and time for that. But to be honest with you, this query system and the capabilities and the information it now gives the insurer is really, in my opinion, if I'm still in practice, the way to go. What does the query tell us? Is he or she on Medicare? Oh, they are. Okay. What type of Medicare does this person have? That question I'll address in a minute. Now, the other issue on this slide, or this fact pattern, is when should you be doing this? Clearly not thinking about it after the fact, when you're driving home or you're in an elevator, et cetera. Make sure as you head into the mediation or the settlement process, you have a firm understanding whether or not, and a current understanding, whether or not the claimant is a Medicare beneficiary. You could have checked 9 months ago, and the answer was no, they're not on Medicare. But all of a sudden today, I'm getting ready for, say, mediation at the end of January, and I check, oh my God, the person is on Medicare, right? Query process, probably the best method, okay? And early as part of the claim process and close in time to when you start talking turkey about settlement. Determining Medicare status, question 1. Go to number 2. Okay. All right, Medicare program features. Here's the other part that's connected to question 1. Which of the following are true? I'm gonna do each one to make it simple. A, Medicare Part A and B is known as traditional Medicare and is run by the federal government, CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's true. B, Medicare Part C is Medicare Advantage, and these are Medicare plans offered by private insurers. That's true. C, Medicare Part D is the prescription drug program of Medicare provided by private insurers. That's true. Okay, so now let's look at this. So what is this telling us? This is telling us that there are different parts of Medicare that are run by different entities. A and B, traditional Medicare, is run by CMS. C and D are private Medicare plans run by private insurers, right? So as part of our calculus, when we're assessing Medicare recovery claims, now it's not just important to know whether the claimant's on Medicare. Now we need to know what type of Medicare the person has, but don't fret. A second ago, I told you about the Section 111 query, and if you listen carefully, I was saying that the query tells us if this person's on Medicare, and now it also tells us the information you see on the screen, the type of Medicare the person has. This is vitally important because when Shawn starts to do these fact patterns, we got to know where we are because there's different processes depending if the person's at A and B, traditional government Medicare, C, Medicare Advantage, or D. And just a little bit about these programs so you know going in, okay? So A's hospitalization, B's outpatient services, CMS administers the plan, one plan in the country no matter where you sit, okay? Part C, people have their Medicare benefits through a private insurer, not the government. They've elected to go private, right? You ever notice all those commercials on the TV with the celebrities? This is what they're pushing people to join, the Medicare Advantage plan, and they're very successful at it. We are roughly 48% of all the Medicare beneficiaries in the country are now on a private Medicare Advantage plan. Vitally important for us to know this because we got to know what type of recovery case we have. Who do we have to deal with? Okay, you're going to see that as we go. And D, it's very similar to C. It's private and it's prescription drugs. So if the claimant wants prescription drugs, he or she purchases a private Medicare Part D plan. Check this out. 77% of all Medicare beneficiaries have a Part D program. Query process helps us figure all this out. Okay, so now I hopefully laid the groundwork in a sufficient way where we can move forward, and let's check out where we're headed next. Okay, keep it right here, Shawn. Okay, now Shawn's going to come in. Okay, we are now going to talk about claimants that we have determined have their benefits through the governmental program, CMS, Part A and B, conditional payment. Okay, we check the query. Query tells us Joe Smith has Medicare through the government, Part A and B plan. So this is where our mind goes. So what are our obligations? What type of rights does CMS have? What could go wrong if we don't take care of this correctly? How does CMS's process work? These are the questions we're going to tackle right now. All right, Shawn, get ready. Let me fire it up. I'll read it to you. Let's go to the next screen. Okay, folks, we're talking about CMS claims. Look up top. I told you, right? Here we go, Shawn. If a CMS recovery claim is not properly addressed and resolved and repaid back, what rights does the government, CMS, have? Shawn, can they assess interest?
Yeah, Mark, you betcha. Starting 60 days after a demand is issued.
Can they refer delinquent debt to Treasury?
Yep, this one they also can do.
When do they do that, Shawn?
120 days after the debt's delinquent. So usually about 180, 200 days after a demand has been issued. So a couple months down the line.
Okay. Can the government sue insurers for double damage?
Yeah, they can bring suit in federal court seeking double damages if they're not properly reimbursed.
And can they also go after the claimant and or his or her lawyer?
Yes, they can. Any party that makes or receives payment. So, the insurance carrier that made a settlement payment, but also the Medicare beneficiary claimant that received a payment, or even the claimant's lawyer, given the portion of the settlement that they received as attorney's fees.
So, folks, big picture here is CMS, maybe not surprisingly, has all types of rights, right? And they have alternative rights, right? They can assess interest. They can go after the claimant lawyer, and the claimant lawyer, maybe they get tired of that, they can go after the insurer. So this is why, no matter how acrimonious the litigation may be, the parties should be on the same page when it comes to how are we going to address CMS recovery claims. Shawn, let's move ahead. Number 4. All right, Shawn, fact pattern, here we go. Case number 1. Folks, pay close attention to the facts. Okay, we have a workers' compensation case in number 1. It's an open case. The case has been accepted. The claimant's on traditional Medicare A and B, CMS Medicare. Case hasn't settled yet. Okay, it's still ongoing. Okay, the adjuster wants to determine whether CMS has a recovery claim. So the adjuster talks to the MSA vendor and says to the vendor, hey, go get the claimant to sign an authorization so you can contact CMS to determine whether they have a lien and get the lien amount. Shawn, evaluate the adjuster's instruction here. Is this necessary at this point of this workers' compensation claim?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. So really the key here, I don't want to spoil too much from where we'll get in a couple of fact patterns, but the key here is that the claim hasn't settled yet. So when we're talking about claims that are open accepted workers' compensation claims, Medicare's current workflow is to seek recovery against the insurance carrier. So in that instance, there would be no need to seek an authorization from the claimant. Medicare is going to deal directly with the insurance carrier. And so if the insurance carrier wants to bring a vendor in to assist them with that, any authorization could come from the insurance carrier. So there'd be no need to involve the claimant. And again, this is really about pre-settlement claims. So when they're open, accepted, when there's that ongoing responsibility for medicals.
Okay, now let's change the facts, Shawn. Basically the same facts, but this time it's a third-party liability case. The adjuster says to the vendor, go out, get the claimant's authorization so you can check to see whether CMS is asserting a lien and how much it is. Does the situation change here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think here the adjuster is spot on with the instructions. What Medicare's workflow in third-party liability claims, because in 99.99% of times those claims are denied, there's not that ongoing responsibility for medicals. Medicare's trigger for recovery is when the settlement is reported to them. And so their workflow on these third-party liability claims is to seek recovery from the claimant out of the settlement funds that they received. So in those instances, because Medicare is seeking recovery from the claimant, there's going to need for anybody else other than the claimant or their attorney to be involved in working with Medicare, for instance, a vendor, there's going to need to be an authorization signed by the claimant, allowing Medicare to disclose the conditional payment information to that third party. So here, I think in case 2, the adjuster's instructions spot on.
Yeah, so folks, what we're seeing here is that CMS has a different process, right? No matter they have all these great rights to go after everybody, but their process could differ depending on the type of claim, the status of the claim. And in this example, we saw in an open workers' comp case that hasn't settled, pre-settlement, no need to get the claimant's authorization. The carrier can deal directly with CMS. We're going to see that change later, like Shawn said, right? And we see in a third-party liability case, there is a need. There is a need there to get the claimant to execute an authorization if the carrier wants to be the one to go out and figure out if there's a lien. Okay. All right. Number 5. Okay. Which of the following, Shawn, is or are true regarding CMS's recovery process? CMS uses the Workers' Compensation Review Center to help process its conditional payment recovery claims. True or false, Shawn?
That's false. The WCRC, those are the folks that will review a Medicare set-aside proposal, in a workers' compensation claim. If folks are looking to settle a claim and want to propose an MSA amount to Medicare, the WCRC, those are the folks that are going to review those proposals. So they're not involved in the conditional payment recovery process.
But Shawn, by default, then B is true. Talk to us a little bit about the two contractors that CMS uses. You touched on it before, but talk a little bit about them and where and how they relate.
Yeah, and so Medicare involves both the BCRC and the CRC in the conditional payment recovery process. Folks may be aware that the BCRC, they're also the entity that handles the Section 111 electronic reporting information that comes into Medicare. They also handle conditional payment recovery for claims involving settlement, so that TPOC reporting. So primarily third-party liability claims, but also sometimes workers' compensation claims that settle. And the Commercial Repayment Center, they handle recovery based off ongoing responsibility for medicals, or ORM. Those are those open and accepted claims, more typically seen in the workers' comp, no-fault, med-pay situations. And so that's how Medicare kind of bifurcates their recovery and involves the two different contractors.
Shawn, let me ask you, the CRC, what's the main letter a carrier who has ongoing responsibility, ORM, could expect to see from the CRC contractor, and what's the significance of that?
Yeah, so the first letter you'll likely receive from the CRC would be what they call a conditional payment notice. That's Medicare's kind of indication that they've identified some medical treatment that Medicare paid for that they believe the other entity, say a workers' comp carrier, should have been responsible for. And the key there is that you've got 30 days to respond. There's kind of a ticking clock in those instances. That Medicare has indicated they intend to start to seek recovery. And so, it's really important to follow those timeframes and deadlines as the case moves along.
How about on the BCRC side? What type of letters and how do they differ from what you just explained with CRC?
Yeah, so pre-settlement with the folks at the BCRC, because settlement is the recovery trigger for them, they'll issue typically what they call a conditional payment letter, which just lists the treatment that Medicare has paid for that Medicare believes to be related to the claim. But because Medicare doesn't seek recovery until they're notified of settlement, there's no time frame for responding to a conditional payment letter. So really the key difference is with the BCRC, the timeliness aspect, the response of the interest, the potential for treasury, that all happens when a claim settles. That's the trigger for recovery. Whereas the CRC, they recover on a rolling basis. So the timeframes, you may need to respond while your claim is open pre-settlement.
Excellent. So folks, I always tell when we work with clients, we tell them, look, these letters are boring. They're not the prettiest documents you see that come in the office. Shawn works with them every day, right? Okay. But you have to read them, because you have to understand what CMS is saying to you. And I think we have an example coming up. If not, we'll talk about it at the end. Like that CPN is going to have that 30-day notice that Shawn mentioned. And Shawn, I've been on a bunch of calls where, it kind of got missed, and they, the insurer has a great defense to the conditional payment claim, but for the fact, Shawn, they missed the deadline. We've been through that a lot this year. Okay.
Exactly, Mark.
Yeah, I know. Number 6. All right. Workers' comp case, folks. It's compensable. As part of the 111 reporting, the workers' comp insurance carrier files ORM, ongoing responsibility, for the right knee and the right shoulder. Oh, here we go. The insurer gets a conditional payment notice from the CRC. Typical. Alleging that CMS has a recovery claim for $4,213 related to the claim. Adjuster gets that today, tells defense counsel, let's make the claimant responsible for this as part of the settlement conference set in February 2023. I will just hold on to this for now. Shawn, evaluate the adjuster's position and potential implications here.
Yeah, so there's a couple things at play here, Mark, that we'd want to consider. The first, like we talked about on the last slide, a conditional payment notice from Medicare, when that's issued, there's 30 days to respond with a dispute. So, here we are just before Christmas in December, 30 days from now, or whenever Medicare issued the conditional payment notice, by February, you're going to be out of time frame for a dispute. So at that point, Medicare will likely have issued a demand. They'll be seeking reimbursement. You can still appeal a demand, but with a CPN, that's kind of your first chance to get a dispute. It's kind of a free crack at a dispute before Medicare issues a demand. So you want to, really dig into that, look at the treatment. Is it related? Would it be owed under the claim? And you want to get a dispute in as soon as possible. So setting it aside for a little while, not really something we recommend. And the other piece is with regards to making the claimant responsible, like we talked about on the prior slides with the Commercial Repayment Center, the CRC, their workflow process is to pursue recovery from the insurance carrier. So they're really going to be expecting the insurance carrier to respond. They're not going to really go after the claimant, even if the parties have agreed to that. It's not really their workflow. So, really when Medicare sends these letters and seeks recovery from the insurance carrier, we want to be, timely and make sure we're responding to them.
Yeah, CPNs are crucial, folks. And this is where we talked about this slide, last slide, et cetera. Not something you can sit on. And I get it's easy to get into that because years ago, we were all used to CMS's letters that said, hey, we got a claim, but don't do anything now. Wait till you settle and then let us know. But the CPN is different, as Shawn is saying. CPN is saying, hey, man, we got a claim and we're ready to go now. You got 30 days to respond or object. So this is not one of those letters that we see here at this quotation that you just want to hold off on for now. You want to make sure you are addressing it timely. All right, next one, Shawn. All right, no fault people. Okay, we got a 5K policy, we got an auto claim, claimant to Medicare beneficiary. The claimant asked the adjuster to be reimbursed for her out-of-pocket medical expenses, which exceed the $5,000 policy amount. Adjuster is cautious, as he does not want to run afoul of Medicare. Shawn, evaluate the best practice considerations in situations like this.
Yeah, so in a situation like this where you're dealing with a Medicare beneficiary, Medicare hasn't sent a demand, they're not seeking any reimbursement at this point, but they could down the line. What you want to do is if you're making payments that might exhaust the policy, you want to make sure you're documenting your file with enough information that if Medicare were to pursue recovery, you could prove to Medicare that you had exhausted the policy. And so usually when making payments out of a no-fault policy to providers, Medicare will accept documentation as to the provider that was reimbursed, the dates of service, the billed amount, the paid amount, that sort of basic information that's usually contained on a payment history. But we run into situations sometimes where if folks are reimbursing the claimant directly, Medicare might ask for a little additional information because they want to be able to see which specific expenses a claimant was reimbursed for. So in those situations, we just recommend documenting the file. If the claimant has copies of their bills, receipts, checks, something like that to show, that the claimant was reimbursed for specific expenses. And then obviously the backup to all of this that we're talking about is the Section 111 reporting. And so if a no-fault policy is exhausted, we also want to make sure that the Section 111 reporting is updated to reflect that ongoing responsibility for medicals has terminated and that the policy has exhausted, so that Medicare has that information, and maybe it'll make it less likely that Medicare will issue a demand if they're already on notice that the policy existed, but it's been fully exhausted.
All right, I learned something on that one. I did not know that. Go ahead, Shawn, number 8.
All right.
All right, liability, folks. Third party liability. You got a liability case with a no-fault claim, right? Typical type car accident, probably, right? Adjuster's working to settle a third-party liability claim with claimant's counsel. When the topic of Medicare comes up, the claimant's attorney says, do not worry about Medicare, as the no-fault carrier has already reimbursed Medicare for conditional payments. Shawn, there are issues here. What are they?
Yeah, this is fairly common in situations where there are multiple different coverage types involved. And what we always tell people is Medicare treats each coverage type as though it's a distinct case in their system. So even if you have a case where maybe there's some no-fault coverage involved in a third-party liability claim, and the no-fault carrier may have already reimbursed Medicare for some conditional payments. That doesn't mean that Medicare might not have other treatment that wasn't reimbursed on the no-fault demand, and so they might seek recovery out of a liability settlement for conditional payments. So, really, even if there are multiple coverage types involved, each one wants to take their Medicare compliance obligations seriously and independent of the other. So still, even if that a no-fault adjuster worked with Medicare, reimbursed them for some conditional payments, if you settle the liability claim, Medicare is going to open up a separate case and they may pursue recovery. So want to be cognizant of that and make sure everything's taken care of.
Now, Shawn, in that type of situation, so let's say I got a 5K policy, right? I'm getting in an accident, and the 5K, goes within, within the first week, I had needed substantial treatment, et cetera, right? And I also have a third-party suit, and then later I settle it. I'm on Medicare. That type of situation, are we really then looking at Medicare's lien claim falling on the third-party side of the house because no fault really paid out their stuff, their money?
Yeah, exactly, Mark. I mean, it's, depending on when the no-fault policy was exhausted, even if it was maybe exhausted before Medicare even came into the picture, it's very common to see much more of the conditional payment amount towards the liability claim because those, tend to settle a little further down the line. Whereas your point, often no-fault claims have low policy limits; they get exhausted pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Okay, let's go to number 9. Thanks, Shawn. Go to number 9. Hey, workers' comp. Now we're back to comp. The comp people have accepted the lumbar spine. Here we go again. The adjuster receives a conditional payment notice, the CPN, where the claimant is intending to seek, Medicare is intending to seek recovery for treatment of unrelated diabetes. Adjuster double checks the Section 111 reporting and sees the carrier is reporting an ICD code for diabetes to Medicare under the claim. What's going on here, Shawn? Can we dispute the diabetes? And if so, is there any trickiness to it?
Yeah, this is an issue we run into a lot where Medicare really heavily relies on the information that's reported to them via Section 111. So, they get your data loss, your ICD codes for the injuries, maybe if there's a settlement, policy limits, stuff like that. And Medicare really defaults to that information. So sometimes, if folks are over-inclusive with the ICD codes, Medicare is going to look at that. And in this instance, look at it and say, well, the carrier reported the diabetes code to us, so we think it's related. So if you try to dispute diabetes treatment off the conditional payment notice, Medicare is going to cross-reference that with the information that's on file, the ICD codes they have, and likely they're going to reject that dispute because the carrier has told them the diabetes is related. So in those instances, what we want to do is make sure we correct the Section 111 reporting. That way, the underlying information that Medicare has is accurate and up to date. And then maybe, this is a situation where maybe the dispute might require a little additional documentation, maybe a first report of injury, some medical records, something like that, that really shows Medicare and underscores, hey, no, the lumbar spine is the only accepted injury here. The diabetes that was reported in error, it's been corrected. Here are the actual injuries. So definitely something we still want to dispute, but it gets a little more complicated when the Section 111 reporting doesn't line up with the response to the conditional payment notice.
And folks, if you haven't caught the vibe yet, there is this relationship between the 111 reporting and at least CMS conditional payment claims, Medicare Part A and B. So Shawn just discussed that even more in depthly on this example, but you heard vestiges of that along the way today. And also, in this type of an example, for those of you who are also steeped in the 111 process, what Shawn just described, where there's a contradiction between what the insurer is reporting to CMS as being accepted, ORM, and then the position they take regarding the lien. If there's a contradiction between the two, that could also end up being a Section 111 penalty situation based on what CMS's proposals are right now. So there's many good reasons to make sure your Section 111 reporting is accurate. Okay, we highlighted some there. All right, Shawn, let's go to number 10. Another comp case. Adjuster looking to settle an open and accepted claim with a claimant who is a Medicare beneficiary. Okay, claimants on Medicare. During the claim, the adjuster received several conditional payment notices. Wow, Shawn, we're going to have to talk to the group whether that's even possible. They've received several conditional payment notices from Medicare, the CRC, for treatment not related to the claim, and has successfully disputed those notices. As part of the settlement agreement, workers' comp agrees to be responsible for handling Medicare's quote-unquote final demand. Shawn, there's a lot to unpack here. What issues are raised? What are the potential pitfalls? What could have been done to avoid some of the pitfalls that are present in this fact pattern?
Yeah, Mark, like you said, a lot going on here. So to your first point, it's not uncommon with the CRC's rolling recovery process to see several rounds of recovery during the life of a workers' comp claim. Medicare, if they identify treatment they believe to be related, they'll issue that conditional payment notice, seek recovery. Maybe it gets disputed out. Maybe 6 months down the line, they identify some additional treatment. They, issue another conditional payment notice. You kind of round and round you go on the merry-go-round until, you settle a claim and you can finally get off. Here, where this is where what we talked about a little earlier with the pre and post settlement, things can get a little complicated here, because as we've noted, during the life of the claim, while it was open, Medicare was pursuing recovery from the insurance carrier. But post settlement, Medicare may do one last sweep for claims and issue a final demand. And based on their current workflow, that final demand is likely to go to the claimant. So this is where, going back to one of the earlier ones, this is a situation where the adjuster would likely want to have an authorization secured from the claimant if the workers' comp carrier is going to be responsible for handling the final demand. So here, you want to kind of get in front of things, knowing that if you settle the claim, Medicare might seek recovery, and it's going to seek recovery from the claimant. If somebody else other than the claimant is going to be handling that recovery, they want to make sure they have that authorization signed and in hand, because you hate to run into a situation down the line where the claimant gets a demand, they don't respond to it. It's difficult or impossible to get a hold of them and get that authorization signed. So you've got folks who've agreed to be responsible for reimbursing Medicare, but they can't get that authorization. They can't deal with Medicare. Meanwhile, the demand maybe gets referred to Treasury. They start taking the claimant Social Security benefits. It can be a kind of a huge mess. So that's, really we want to make sure we get in front of these things.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Shawn, the way I understand it. And Shawn knows how much I love this part in the office, right? So I think back to, when I was at defense practice, and Shawn, so basically from like what you're telling me, CMS's process, okay? So I'm a comp carrier, I've accepted the case, I have ORM, and we now know that pre-settlement, they're coming after me, the comp carrier, as the debtor. I don't need an authorization from the claimant to deal with CMS. I can go one-on-one, don't need an authorization. But when the case settles, if there's any remaining debt, if I, the workers' comp carrier, wants to handle and make sure this remaining debt is resolved, you're telling me that at that point, the only way the carrier can do it is if they get an authorization from the claimant. Do I have it right?
Yeah, exactly, Mark. The CRC will finalize whatever cases they have open that they've been working with the insurance carrier on. So those, they'll still be able to work on those. But yeah, they may generate a new case at time of settlement, and that case will go against the claimant. And so it can definitely be a little bit of a tricky, you think you're doing one thing the whole way along through the life of the claim, and then at the end, it just kind of switches over and Medicare changes the process right out from under you.
Very interesting system. All right, number 11. All right, another comp case. Adjuster receives a demand. The case is open. The lumbar spine. However, the claimant is not treated under the claim for years. Oh, how many folks have these type of cases? The adjuster examines CMS's demand and notes the following: sleep apnea, and there are also claims for treatment for the accepted lumbar injury, but from an unauthorized medical provider. Shawn, can the carrier challenge CMS's demand in this fact pattern?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. This really underscores that there are a couple of different ways to challenge Medicare's demand. The most common, like we're seeing here with the sleep apnea treatment, is if Medicare just includes treatment on the demand that's not related to the accepted injuries. But also Medicare recognizes that there are some situations where what they call non-covered services. So here, if this is a state or jurisdiction where maybe under a workers' compensation claim, a claimant is required to treat with their specific authorized provider or provider network, or maybe a claimant needs to seek pre-authorization before getting a surgery or something like that. Those are reasons that you can challenge Medicare's demand, and try to get that treatment removed by presenting to Medicare that the workers' comp carrier wouldn't have been responsible for instance treatment with an unauthorized medical provider.
And I believe there's some jurisdictions. I think California has a big case on that, right? And I think maybe Texas, Fifth Circuit, talking about unauthorized treatment, et cetera. All right, number 12. All right, adjuster receives a phone call from a collection agency alleging that the insurance carrier owes Medicare money and that the carrier's tax return is going to be garnished if they don't make payment to the collection agency immediately. The adjuster freaks out, calls Shawn Johnson. Shawn, what's likely going on?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. As much as this one, seems like sort of maybe one of those calls you get and you answer it and you might think, somebody's similar to somebody trying to sell you an extended car warranty. This is a real thing that happens to folks. And what happens likely here is that this is the Department of Treasury getting involved. When Medicare, if a demand goes unresolved, Medicare will refer the case to the Department of Treasury, and they have two tracks that they use to try to seek recovery, both at the same time. They're not exclusive. One is they contract with a suite of private collection agencies to try to collect the debt. So those are the folks you might receive a phone call from, a letter, a fax. They're reaching out trying to get payment. There's also the Treasury Offset Program. When Medicare refers a debt to the Department of Treasury, they include the debtor's tax ID if it's company, or Social Security number if it's a claimant that owes the debt. And the Treasury Offset Program will try to intercept any federal or some state payments to that entity to try to pay the debt. So it could be, in the instance of an entity, maybe a corporate tax return, grant money, anything like that, or an individual could be their Social Security benefits that could be garnished. So likely here, what's happened is that a demand has made its way to the Department of Treasury, and they're looking to collect on Medicare's behalf.
John, do you get notices like, well, the insurance, because sometimes I have clients call me and they say, Mark, I never even knew it was a treasury. I mean, like, are you supposed to get notices of like CMS's intent to send it over to Treasury? I mean, how does that part of the process work or not work?
Yeah, Mark. So initially the process, the way it works is Medicare issues that demand. That's their letter indicating that they're seeking recovery. They want to be paid. Or an appeal should be filed within the 120-day time frame. As that time frame starts to tick along, Medicare will typically send a second letter called an intent to refer letter, indicating this debt's delinquent. We intend to refer the letter to Treasury. Once a case gets to Treasury, the Department of Treasury typically sends out a Treasury notice letter. And then if it makes its way to a private collection agency, you might start to see letters from that collection agency. So there should be a series of letters that go out. We certainly see situations sometimes where folks don't get a letter. Maybe Medicare had the wrong address on file for a carrier or something like that. Maybe it went to different office, got lost somewhere in transition. So there should be a series of letters kind of laying the process out. And that's why with Medicare, we always talk about, making sure you're getting the letters, you're responding to them within time frame, because we always hate to see something where the Department of Treasury gets involved.
John, in terms of negotiating or disputing claims with Treasury, what's been your experience? I mean, first of all, is it possible? And secondly, kind of what do you see when you start to dispute cases with Treasury?
Yeah, it's possible. It's difficult because by nature, everything that's with the Department of Treasury for collections is beyond the time frame for an appeal. So there is that difficulty there, kind of getting beyond that issue with Medicare. There are some ways in certain instances and a lot of different approaches. But really, the piece to keep in mind is that the Department of Treasury is really just looking to collect. they aren't really capable or tasked with reviewing the substance of a dispute. So any sort of dispute that goes to Treasury gets routed by them back to the folks at Medicare, who will review the underlying issues and kind of play a game of telephone back to the Department of Treasury with it. So when you're dealing with Treasury, you're also dealing with Treasury, but you're also still dealing with Medicare. So they're never really out of the picture.
Yeah, and when we work, build protocols, etc., your goal obviously is to avoid Treasury, right? And if you start to get a lot of these Treasury claims in, there's something wrong in the process. Something is not right somewhere. Got to look at your protocols. Treasury, not a lot of fun. Okay, number 13, Shawn. All right, which of the following is most accurate? Steve, I'll do both, and then you tell me which one, Shawn. CMS is pretty flexible with the deadline dates in their correspondence. Or B, CMS and its contractors, BCRC and CRC, require strict compliance with the deadlines. And if you miss the deadlines, you can weaken or even extinguish your ability to challenge a CMS claim.
Yeah, Mark, as much as I wish it was A, it's definitely B. Medicare has become, stricter and stricter over the last couple of years in really holding folks, to the time frames for any appeal deadlines, dispute deadlines, things like that. So really, it's one of the things we really try to underscore for folks is that, you really want to make sure you're responding within any applicable time frame, because otherwise, you could have the greatest dispute in the world, and if you're beyond the time frame, it may really limit your options as far as an appeal.
Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, parties include the following language. Plaintiff agrees to be responsible for reimbursing any and all Medicare liens, and also agrees to hold the defendant harmless and indemnifies the defendant against all liability. Is CMS restricted in this instance from only pursuing the plaintiff for its recovery based on the settlement language?
No, so CMS is not a party to the settlement agreement, so they're not bound by it. And as we've talked about a little bit through the presentation, Medicare has a lot of broad rights to recover, so they could recover against the claimant, they could recover against the carrier. We know their workflows generally, but they're not necessarily bound by those either. They could change their workflow tomorrow. And so, while it's useful to include settlement language, we want to make sure the parties kind of outline their intentions and come to an agreement about how Medicare is going to be reimbursed. It's not something we necessarily want to always rely on 100% because, Medicare isn't really bound or restricted by the settlement language.
All righty, next one. All right, keep it right here, Shawn. All right, so folks, we gave a pretty big overview of Medicare conditional payment claims where the claimant was in Medicare Part A and B. CMS, traditional Medicare. And when we talk about CMS recovery, you heard all the acronyms. BCRC is involved, CRC is involved, Treasury is involved. Okay. So now the question becomes, well, now we have a person that's on Part C or D. How does this all change? And it does. Okay. So let's go to the next one. Shawn, I'll give you a break for one or two. I'll do them. Nationally, what percentage of Medicare beneficiaries are now in a Medicare Advantage plan? We abbreviate it as MAP, M-A-P. And what impact can this have on claims? Approximately 48%, 35%, 25, or 15. It's 48%. I mentioned that at the beginning. So this means, depending on where you are, you could have a very high concentration of Medicare Advantage beneficiaries in your claims. Right? So I think the next slide is the only traditional slide I had. I'm pretty sure. No, there it is. The enrollment rate. If you are in a red state if you're in a red state, you have Medicare Advantage enrollment rates of greater than 50%. Puerto Rico, 73. If you are in an orange state, then you have Medicare Advantage enrollment rates between 40 and 50%. Very high. So you need to be on the lookout for potential Medicare Advantage enrollment, Medicare Advantage recovery claims. How do you know if the person's in a Medicare Advantage plan? The query. Remember, I talked about that at the beginning. All right, next paragraph, next slide, Shawn. I'm writing an article, so it's still on my mind. All right, Medicare Advantage plan. All right, Shawn, claimant's Medicare beneficiary adjuster says, hey, Verisk, go out to CMS and see if Medicare is asserting a lien. Okay? CMS comes back and reports no conditional payment. The adjuster is perplexed because the claimant testified at her depot that Medicare covered one of her surgeries. She calls Shawn. What gives, Shawn? What's going on here? Why does CMS keep coming back and telling us there is no conditional payment?
Yeah, Mark, this is a classic scenario we see all the time. Folks know that Medicare is paid for some treatment. Medicare comes back and gives you that nice $0 conditional payment letter that you love to see, but it's a little bit of fool's gold there. What's likely happening here is that the claimant's enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan, and Medicare Advantage plans, because they're operated by private insurance companies, they don't use the traditional Medicare conditional payment recovery process. So anything that they seek to recover, they're going to it's going to be them through their own subrogation departments. Maybe they have different vendors. However they do it, it's not going to be through the traditional BCRC, CRC, conditional payment notice, all that stuff that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation.
Yep, we see this a lot. Next one, 17. I'll do it, Shawn. Which of the following are true? The Section 111 query process provides insurer with information regarding a claimant's Medicare Advantage and Part D enrollment status. That's the answer. That's true. Does it also provide you with lien information? No. It gives you the contact information of the plans, though. So if you want to spearhead it, you can take that information, contact the plans. Where do you find it again? The Section 111 query makes another appearance in the slides. Go ahead. Next, there we go. So, can Medicare Advantage plans sue insurance carriers for double damages? This is another traditional slide, one of only two, right? Okay. And the answer is, in the red states, you have circuit court decisions that say yes, Medicare Advantage plans can sue insurance carriers for double damages. Yellow states, courts a little bit lower, U.S. district courts, got to look in your, like, for instance, California has multiple district courts. The Central District in California ruled that, yes, Medicare Advantage plans can sue for double damages. In Texas, you also have multiple district courts, and I think 3 out of the 4 or 5 have ruled that, yes, Medicare Advantage plans can sue for double damages. So what do you take away from the slide? If you're in a red jurisdiction, you better be paying attention to Medicare Advantage. If you're in a yellow jurisdiction, caution still, because you have some authority. How about in the gray states? Does that mean you're scot-free and you leave early? No. That just means the courts have not touched the issue of whether or not the maps have double damages, but they would still have some form of recovery right. Next one. All right, I just did that so we could go to the next one. I did it I had the slides, folks, mixed up, so I did it from my head. All right, here we go. Shawn, can this happen? Then we're going to open it up for questions about 154. E. Check out this fact pattern, folks. Study this. Date of accident 2/1/19. On the date of accident, the claimant was in traditional Medicare Part A and B. The following year, she's on Humana Medicare Advantage plan. The following year, she goes over to Aetna Medicare Advantage plan. And then this year, she goes back to traditional Medicare. Shawn, can this happen? Why can this happen if it can? And then what does this tell us in the bigger picture?
Yeah, and this is a really good scenario, because this is the sort of thing we see all the time. Folks during open enrollment each year, Medicare beneficiaries can decide, if do they like their traditional Medicare benefits? Do they want to, enroll in one of these Medicare Advantage plans? Like Mark said, they have pretty extensive marketing. Folks maybe, have heard of a Humana plan, or they see a commercial for an Aetna plan. Maybe they want to sign up, or a lot of these Advantage plans offer extra benefits, maybe a little more coverage than traditional Medicare. So folks, enroll in those. Maybe they're unhappy with their plan. They want to try a different one. And they can also go back during an open enrollment to traditional Medicare. So this is the sort of thing we see all the time, folks changing plans, and one good thing with the PAID Act query data that's coming back now with the Section 111 reporting is that for the last 3 years, it'll give you the information about which Medicare program or plan somebody's enrolled in. So now we're starting to get this information through the Section 111 query data. So now we can tell which plans that somebody's been enrolled in over the preceding 3 years, and that kind of illuminates for you, like the prior situation where you had that $0 conditional payment letter. Here, what you might see is if you got a conditional payment letter, treatment from right around the date of the accident, treatment in 2022, but a gap in 2020 and 2021. And now with the Section 111 data, you'll be able to see, okay, actually, this beneficiary was enrolled in a Humana plan in 2020 and an Aetna plan in 2021. And then you can kind of work to address those interests at that point. So it really provides a little more illumination now with the Section 111 data.
Thanks, Shawn. Let's see. Let me see what I have. Diane, I'll bring you and Mandy back in. Let's see on the next one. Let's see if I had, yeah, look, Part D folks, 77% of the folks have a Part D plan. These plans also have recovery rights. They're not as aggressive, they're not as active as the Part C and CMS, but we realized one way or the other they could come after you. They do have rights, so you got to figure out as part of the settlement how you want that to be addressed. Okay, let's open it up. Diane, do we have any questions in the box, or Mandy? Anybody coming in? Oh, yeah, there we are. We're pretty close. Almost right on time. So what are you guys seeing?
Hi, Mark. Tsitsi here. Sorry, guys. I have some questions here in the chat that I'm going to review for you guys. The first question we have is from someone who asked, I have a workers' comp claim that includes lumbar. And the claimant was in a motor vehicle accident that resulted in need for lumbar fusion, unrelated to the claim. Medicare sent a conditional payment notice for reimbursement regarding the lumbar fusion surgery. Is there any way to dispute?
Shawn.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's going to be tricky. Medicare looks, initially at the relatedness. All right, so if they're seeking reimbursement for stuff that's completely unrelated, usually you don't need any additional documentation. You can kind of prove it with the information that's included. But if it's the same injury and you have maybe a subsequent accident such as this or something like that, it's possible to dispute, but you're going to need a lot more documentation. So usually you want to provide medical records in those instances. It's kind of the gold standard, and you can show Medicare that, no, this is for the same body part, but as you can see from the medical records, there is another cause for this, or there's another intervening incident.
Folks, look at Shawn's phone number there. Whoever asked that question, take it down and give Shawn a call privately. You guys can rap about it further. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, I have a couple more questions here. So if the medical legal report first finds a conditional compensable, but then later finds it unrelated, can you change that reporting?
Mark, I don't know if you want to.
Mark, do you
So so first they're saying that they reported an accepted body part and now it's denied. Yeah. My understanding is you gotta have a basis for it, right? Something could have happened, right? Could have had an intervening accident, a statute could have run on that injury, et cetera. The benefits could have expired. It really depends on the type of case that it is. And I would invite that person to shoot me an email or give me a call. I want to talk to you a little bit further about some of the facts on that one. Okay, so shoot me an email, give me a call later, and I want to ask some more stuff. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, and this is our final question. So is a request for, I'm guessing it says demand, DEP, from Treasury, a federal credit agency, requested for redetermination appropriate? I'm
not totally clear, but yeah, I mean, typically when dealing with Treasury, the first thing you want to do if you get a new debt from Treasury is you want to request that proof of debt. So you want to get a copy of the underlying. Usually they'll send you a copy of the Medicare intent to refer letter. That way you can see, okay, initial Treasury letter usually just says, hey, you owe the U.S. government X dollars, but it doesn't list the charges that Medicare is seeking reimbursement for. So you want to get a copy of that proof of debt, and then that will usually a copy of the Medicare intent to refer letter, which will list the charges that you can do a comprehensive review on and see, do we owe this debt or would we have disputed it? And then at that point, you might be able to engage in the dispute and appeals process. It can be a little tough, as we talked about, because you're kind of outside the time frame for an appeal, but there may be some ways to kind of get back into the process potentially. Treasury stuff's a little tough. It's typically, it's a little more case by case. It's harder to give kind of a blanket answer on Treasury claims. They kind of require a little bit of finessing sometimes. So, certainly if there's a specific case you have in mind, feel free to reach out. Happy to analyze and let you know what we think.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps up our questions that we had here in the chat. Thank you everyone who participated, and thank you, Shawn and Mark.
Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Well, you guys did a marvelous job. I really love that format. It's fantastic. Mandy, I think you'll be joining us so you can say goodbye to everybody. And before I do close out for today, Mandy, why don't you go ahead and if you have any last thoughts, go ahead and share them. Okay, we cannot hear Mandy. Mark, Shawn, Titsi, do you have a closing thought?
Yeah, I do. Going into the new year, kind of take a look at your practices, see what you think is working well, see what you think maybe you need to improve upon after today's session. And Shawn and I are available to help you with that process if you'd like.
Shawn?
No, I just echoing what Mark said. Appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to us chat about Medicare. And yeah, it's never a bad time to kind of look over your Medicare practices. And Medicare is constantly changing. So what worked at one point, maybe the Medicare landscape might have changed. So always worth taking a few minutes to take a look and take a look at the most updated information.
Titsi, thank you so much for asking our questions today. Did you have a final thought you'd like to share?
No, we just thank you guys for this opportunity and for this platform and for everyone who participated today and for our speakers. We have kind of the nation covered here because we have our Shawn and Mark, my colleagues on the East Coast. I'm here on the West, so you can reach us at any time, really. I think we have all those zones covered. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Well, I'm hoping that all of you in the audience are having a fabulous holiday season. This was our 6th CEU for 12 days of CEUs of Christmas. So we have 6 more to go. So later on this afternoon, we are going to be doing denials and the importance of early investigation for accidents. So let's make sure that if you haven't registered for that, you go to the MacroPro website at macropro.com and register for that under upcoming events. In addition to that, tomorrow we have another really great program. It is going to be on closing your claims. All of us want to do that, especially here at the end of the year. And then the last webinar we'll have for this week is going to be on audiology. And it's important to hear all that is going to be said. Until next time, I want to say thank you, that you all are well. See you at the next MacroPro and Friends. Bye-bye now.